Hello, this is Jim Amee with IT Supplies. In this video, we're going to go over how to utilize swatch books to help you fine-tune your spot color libraries in the ONYX RIP suite. So let's get started. So as you can see up here in the RIP module, in the RIP queue, you'll find the swatch books feature right here. You can go ahead and double click on that, and it'll open up this window for you, and you can see I can basically select any of the printers that I have drivers for, that I have setups for, and then I can choose any quick set, for instance, that I would like as well, for fine-tuning the spot color library. Particularly if, for instance, in this particular quick set, I had very specific color management policies that I wanted for CMYK and RGB workflows. Most likely I'm going to be in a CMYK workflow when I'm working with spot color libraries, but you can see here I can make sure that I'm going to use those source spaces, in my CMYK output. And then under here you can see I can choose my different media groups that I have for this particular printer, and then whichever medias that I have, I'll select this one here, and then whichever modes that I have calibrations and profiles for those particular medias. And then as you can see down here below, I can choose in which way I want to fine-tune or set up my spot color libraries within the ONYX RIP. I have choices for a CMYK setup, as you can see here. I have an RGB potential setup for those spot colors, an LAB setup. If you're not familiar with what LAB is basically a universal numerical number that is used to basically define a color in CIE Lab color space, the three-dimensional color spaces, if you've ever seen like the color wheel. And luminance basically is a figure from 0 to 100, as you see here, and 0 being black and 100 being white. So if you're painting yourself a three-dimensional model here, and then the A-axis or X-axis would be, from 0 to positive 127, you would have magenta, and then from 0 to negative 128, you have green. And then on the B-axis, which is the Y-axis, from positive B to 127, you have yellow, and negative B to negative 128, you have blue. So you can see we're talking about opposing colors here. And so for a numerical value, let's just say I chose a 50, which is a middle gray. So that's basically a neutral middle gray, meaning it's a 50 brightness, but no color on either the A or the B axis. So let's just say I chose a 20 magenta, right? So now you're starting to see that I'm a little bit on the magenta side. If I chose negative 20, I'm on the green side of the A axis. So if I chose that back to 0, and then if we looked at the B, let's just say I chose a positive 30, you'll see it's turning it more yellow. And if I did a negative 30, it would be more on the blue side. So let's just say I'm looking for a very specific blue. That is the blue, I'll do 30 here. 50, 30, minus 30, so it's more of a lavender type of a color. I can also measure a patch. So the reason why I wanted to talk about LAB in this situation here is that if you choose to use LAB spot color management, when you actually use a spectrophotometer to measure the spot color, this is the value that it actually gives you. It gives you an LAB value. So it's kind of good to know in terms of the spot color that you have, what is the actual LAB value that you're using. Very, very important here. Mostly because if you're thinking in terms of CMYK recipes, and let's get into that a little bit here. A CMYK recipe is what we consider a device-dependent color recipe or color number, right? So a 40, 50, 60, 80, on one printer is not going to be the same on a different printer with a different ink set, or potentially to a different media, or different printhead technology, or print process altogether. So as you can see here, that same CMYK recipe will give you a different render on different printers. So as it's a starting point, it doesn't really give you the definitive value of that color that would be universal regardless of which printer, media, or printhead you went to. So you want to think of LAB as a universal value and what you would actually measure. So if I was to click measure chart, and if I had my i1 Pro 2 hooked up here, I would be able to utilize it and then go ahead and measure that color, and then it would give me the LAB reading, and it would plug that into here. And so that I can fine tune that exact swatch. Like maybe a customer gave you a swatch of something, and you want to fine tune that because when you print it through your system, it doesn't match what they gave you. This is the main reason why we would fine tune a spot color library. Okay, and then your other options here again are spot color, and I believe here we're looking at essentially something that I've designated, or the Pantone libraries that I've designated within the ONYX suite. Basically, they do have the majority of all the Pantone colors and keep those up to date if you're in the most up-to-date version of the software. So if I wanted to fine-tune a Pantone color, I can do that because, you know, you can expect that every one of those colors is going to come out with the proper brightness, saturation, and hue on your media, on your printer ink set. Okay, so again, not universal necessarily. The spot colors that Pantone provides do have universal LAB values that people aim for. So keep that in mind. And then device values here, I can basically select device values, and you can notice here that on this particular printer, I have the ability to adjust my orange and red inks. This is an Epson S80 here, 9-color printer, and allows me to utilize those inks within the mix for the source color. So essentially, it's giving me more potential for a more saturated spot color management with this printer in a device value workflow. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just keep this here as a CMYK, just so that you can see based on swatch books that CMYK might be the easiest way to work in swatch books, and we'll get to that in a minute, and it'll make a little bit more sense here. But so let's go ahead and let me go ahead and let's make another blue color. So I've got a little bit of cyan, 60% cyan, 20% magenta. We're going to do 0 blue, and let's do a 10 black to darken that blue a little bit. Okay, so with this is going to be the color that I want to match essentially. So if I go ahead and select OK, you can see here that it opens up another window, and as you can see a whole number of swatches in here. So let's go ahead and break this down for you. So swatch types, you can choose either a one-dimensional type of a swatch ramp, you can choose a two-dimensional, or a three-dimensional. As you can see, when I choose each of those dimensions, it opens up the ability to adjust these values down here. So why would you use a one-dimensional? Well, maybe you have basically the chroma and the hue exactly the way you want it. It's just not bright enough. So you just want to print different variations of brightness, plus or minus 3 in variation in this particular case, and then choose the one that's the best match to the swatch, for instance, that you're trying to match. Okay, so as you can see, this can be very visual in actually bringing up swatch samples up to this swatch book print on your particular media in order to make a visual match. Okay, the other thing that you will see as I zoom in is that these have a specific recipe here. Okay, so, and remember when I put in that recipe into the other field, it's basically based on my printer model and the calibration set, linearization and profile print mode that I chose for that media. It took that value, I believe, of 60, 30, 40, 30, something like that, and actually tuned it with this recipe based on my printer output. Okay, so it's already figuring out what's the proper recipe that gave these particular outputs of this blue. Okay, so that would be one reason to do, you know, a one-dimensional. Maybe, you know, the brightness is perfectly fine, but it's really like, it's just not saturated enough for you. So you want to see different levels of saturation. And then you can see here, I can choose very, very fine tuning of that, or I can choose very, very big differences. And as you can see, as I chose plus or minus 9, how much of a difference of blues do I have here now? Now, if I chose the other features, you can see major differences in brightness as I do a much, much wider move. And then in hue, in terms of more yellow blues or magenta blues, it's going to give me those variations here. So if I go back to lightness again, and let's just say a 1, you're going to see a very, very, very mild difference in brightness. I would only choose this if I've almost hit the color perfectly already. Okay, so let's just choose, we'll just choose a 2-dimensional here. Actually, let's just do 3 dimensions. And when we do 3 dimensions, it's actually going to make 2 charts in order to do this for us. And let's just do a variation of 2 in brightness. We'll do a variation of 3 in saturation. You can see saturation lives up here in the first one if I only do 1-dimensional. So let me just show you that really quick. See how I have saturation as an option here, only in 1-dimensional. And 3-dimensional, I have lightness, chroma, which is basically the same thing as saturation. It's how far out that point is in LAB color space. And then hue is the angle of the color in that 3-dimensional wheel, basically, that 3-dimensional color space. What is the angle of that color, basically? So if I choose that, we'll just choose the 3 differences here, and we'll do a finer tune of the hue. And you can see, you know, from that, I can also choose manual patches. As you see, as I hover over this, it shows me what that patch is, and I can basically make some edits to that particular patch if I wanted to make something very, very specific. Okay, so it's going to have the auto patches for me, but then it's also going to allow me to take individual patches and make adjustments to them as well. Nice feature there to fine-tune even the automation that's going on here. So if I go back to auto patches, and then I go ahead, let me just back up here. Sorry to be jumping around on you, but I want to just make sure you see everything on each page here. So if I go, I can edit the source color if I want. It was a 60-20-0-10. So I can edit that source color essentially, and then you can see that I can choose to use the color management from the quick set. So if it wants to use the color management policies that I talked about before, then I can do that. If I want to bypass the color management, I can go ahead and do that. And as you can see, when I've done that, now it's not utilizing that, and it's basically using the calibration and showing me a completely different recipe than if I went through my color management there. And as you can see, as I went through my color management, it gave me a more saturated color, didn't it? Okay, so that's how you would tune your source color if on the second page here, as opposed to the beginning of page, if you wanted to change it. And then the next thing I can do is go ahead and print this. And I can go ahead and add a label if I would like, which I think is a good idea. And I can go ahead and send that to my rip queue. And if we move over to the rip queue here, I'm gonna have to go ahead and close this out so that I can go ahead and get into my rip queue. You'll have to open that up. Keep in mind, you're probably asking yourself, well, what am I going to do? Go ahead and remember that recipe. You're going to see the CMYK recipe for the source color that's on the print itself. Okay, so you'll have that, and just go back into the swatch books, plug that in, and then you can go ahead and make adjustments if you needed to the source color, or to any of those edits if you needed to reprint it a different way. Okay, but essentially what we really needed to do with the swatch book feature is just to be able to get this print out. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up in the job properties here. Actually, let's go to job editor. It's a little bit easier to see. so that you can see the larger patches again. And essentially, after this is going to be printed, let's see if I can go ahead and zoom in for you. So after this is going to be printed, essentially what I would want to do is either take my swatch and line it up to what I think visually looks the closest. Hopefully you have somebody as a visual observer that is seeing color accurately. There are online tests that you can take to make sure that you're not deficient in any part of the spectrum. You can visually match these up, and that's a good way. And then what you're going to do from there is you're going to take that CMYK recipe, that value that you see there, and in your spot color library, that is going to be the new recipe for that spot color for you. I'm going to do something quick with this in the future in terms of you'll see a spot color video coming out for ONYX and the different features in there. And I will revisit this swatch book, very quickly create one, choose a recipe, and show you how to adjust that value in the spot color library itself. Okay, so there will be a link to that video underneath this eventually as well that you can refer to. So what is the other way that I can use the swatch books in order to fine-tune my color? Well, if I'm not trusting my eyes completely, maybe I'm getting a metameric issue from the bulbs that I'm looking under. I'm not looking under a proper viewing booth, and I might be getting tricked by the light bulbs that are in the room that I'm viewing these patches under. Well, I can use a spectrophotometer, right? I can actually measure these patches and see, and I can measure my original swatch, or if the customer gave you the original LAB value, or the original LAB value is actually in the print file that contains these spot colors, then you can actually go ahead and measure the one that looks most visually similar to you and verify that it is the same or a very, very close delta E from the color that you're wanting, right? The LAB numerical value that you're wanting. So you can use a spectrophotometer to verify what you're seeing visually, and that's a really good idea to do so. Okay, and then again, you would choose that CMYK recipe that you see before you, jot that down or just circle it on your print chart, and then go into your spot color library and go ahead and plug that value. So what's going to happen from there is on that printer, on that media, with those print heads basically in that condition that they're in, you should be able to get that exact same color back each and every time you print, given the printer is mechanically printing optimally, right, for the condition. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this job editor here. And as you can see, you can utilize the swatch books workflow to very, very, easily and visually, possibly with some verification, to fine tune your spot color libraries to make sure that you get those spot colors amongst maybe possibly all of your medias on that printer to print the exact same way so that your customers' spot colors are always looking the same. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was helpful for you. We have a whole team of technicians at IT Supplies. My name again is Jim Amihi. I'm the main color consultant for IT Supplies. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions that you have and support you along the way. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for watching this. If you would like to see more of these videos, please go to our YouTube channel.